or other publishing. Wade Franson is the host of Created in the Image of God, a series that examines the role of religion in society, from messianic returns to the emotive responses transmitted through our culture. Wade fearlessly addresses reality claims from all directions, objectively exploring their compatibility with Holy Scripture. Joining him is Daniel Sanderson, CEO of Planksiv, an international philosophy and cultural media outlet, helping emerging thought leaders with personal branding by co-creating organic content. Tonight's episode, The Anguish of Freedom.
Well, we've got a returning guest and philosopher and dare I say friend, Bill Meacham, in studio with us today. You know, the philosophy tradition, at least a modern tradition, existential tradition, I would say, has this fascination with being when it's paired with nothingness, and when it's paired with time. And we have a book that's called Being and Nothingness, and we have a philosopher by the name of Bill Meacham who was being on time. He was just in time. Welcome, Bill Meacham, to the studio. Do you think you could write a book called Being Just in Time?
If I had, yeah, theoretically I could write such a book. I don't know what it would say, but I've written some books. Being just in time.
Yeah, you could do like a fictional story. You can call him Nick of,
Nick of time. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Not to me nicotine. That's not about tobacco. So, yeah. Right, being in the nick of time is a social construct. You're only on time if other people expect you to be at a certain place at a certain time. So outside of social context, you're not in time, you're not on time, you're just there.
Well, that's kind of like Heidegger's throwing you in, right? Like, are we thrown in as social animals into a context of interrelationships and meanings, right?
Yes, we are. And what Heidegger calls Mitsein, we're always with other people. Sein means being, mit in German means with. So yeah, and we're always in time. I mean, that's Heidegger and Sartre both emphasize that the temporality, the fact that everything has a duration, and there's a past, and there's a present, and there's a future, and you only go in one direction. The past is behind us. It's part of what Sartre calls facticity. You can't change the past. It is what it is, or as we experience, it is what it was. I don't know if that makes sense, but if it rained yesterday, which unfortunately it did not here in Texas, but if it rained yesterday, it did rain yesterday. You can't do it. You can't make it not have rained yesterday. But going in the future, it's open. It hadn't happened yet. There's various probabilities of things happening, but they're not here yet. So here we are in the middle. Now, in this middle, it's not like there's a sharp dividing line. It's not like there's an instant. The idea of instantaneous stuff it's an abstraction, and what we really experience is what we might call a thickness of time, a duration. Stuff happens, and it's not like it's like a whole episode of things happening. Okay, that's maybe a little esoteric, but so
here we are. What I want to do, Bill, is that the audience or anybody tuning in, we just really went into the deep end here with philosophy, and I love it. Right, I could continue on for an hour and a half, but let's try and pull back from this a little bit and give the audience a little bit of practical usefulness in terms of the traditions that these philosophers who examined and challenged perceptions of time, what has that given us? Has it changed how we approach theology? Has it changed how we think and coexist within social structures. Does anything come to mind that you would say, just as a broad general?
It's a broad general thing. Well, the broadest general thing is that probably most people don't give a big hoot, as we say. If the philosophers say this about time or that about time or whatever, most people just kind of just go about their business. However, you mentioned theology. That's very interesting. There's a movement, a fairly widespread movement, I think, called process theology. It takes God to be not an eternal, unchanging something, but takes God as changing along with the world. The world we exist in changes, everything it goes, things are happening. The idea of God as some kind of the omni-God, as my friend calls it, omnipotent, omnipresent, all-pervading, all good, all wise, all-seeing, and so forth, that is supposed to be somehow outside of time. And God somehow creates time. But God himself, herself, itself, whatever that is, in this view, is somehow atemporal, outside of time. Well, the process theologians say no. God is not only, there's various flavors of it, but God is not only outside the world, but also in the world. It's not only transcendent, but immanent. God is immanent in the world. God makes things happen in the world. And God, according to the process theologians, God himself, herself, itself changes along with the world.
Hmm.
That idea of God has a, God in that view has a desire, a goal, something that's being striven for, of all pervading goodness and nurturing for the people and the animals and all the beings in the world. But God's not outside of it somehow. God's in it with us. I mean, that's so in the Christian tradition, Jesus gets incarnated and he's a human being and he suffers all the things human beings do. In the Hindu tradition, various kinds of deities get incarnated. Krishna is the charioteer for Arjuna, a warrior. He's just on the battlefield with everybody else, but he's also God. So this idea of taking time seriously is a big deal in certain varieties of theology. But
Well, that's fascinating. What I'm going to do is I think that my good friend Wade is going to be chomping at the bit. Not to give anybody the illusion that he's a horse or anything, but he's going to want to get right into this, I think. And I think he's got a lot to add, especially after last week's episode with Dan Barker, who very sweet man, actually. I enjoyed getting to know him over 2 recordings and some outside recordings, but very much a strict determinist in terms of free will and freedom.
So the topic, as I understood, we're going to talk about my blog essay, The Anguish of Freedom, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so freedom in that sense means we have free will. We're free to choose to do this or that or the other thing. And just to address the determinists, if the world is determined.
Well, wait a minute. Yeah. Bill, let's hold off on that, because I'm gonna bring Wade into
let's hold
that.
off on
We're
that.
gonna
Okay.
Yeah. So hold on. We got our first commercial break, and then we're gonna bring Wade into the studio. Hold on.
In a world increasingly disoriented and lacking spiritual values, many are turning to religion as a source of inspiration and comfort. Each person chooses their individual path, and if there is one thing we are known for, it's providing a positive platform for diverse points of view, to provide each of us the opportunity to discern truth for ourselves. Something or Other Publishing is proud to announce the creation of Royal Falcon Press imprint,
to feature the unparalleled talent of multiple writers who will bring uplifting and thought-provoking contributions to the body of religious literature, offering current spiritual insights and practical solutions to the challenges we face. Let's grow together as one of the most substantial spiritual communities on the internet. Register and explore a new way to achieve universal wisdom and reinforce your faith with all the surprises Royal Falcon Press has in store for you.
Welcome, Wade.
Hey, Dan. Hey, Bill, and hi, everyone in the audience. I was listening in the studio, and I'm very gratified to be a part of this conversation. For those who were here last week, we did have Dan Barker on, who is the co-president of the Freedom from Religious Foundation, which is headquartered, located right here in Madison, Wisconsin, where I was up until a year ago, having moved out just outside of Madison to Brooklyn, Wisconsin. And coincidentally, perhaps, Dan was explaining his position that everything is predetermined. There is no such thing as free will. Free will is an illusion. And so it seems a good thing, Bill, that you're here in the studio with us. And I'm just going to invite you then to unpack your blog a little bit for us. The blog being titled The Anguish of Freedom, as Dan mentioned. You published this on June 29th. It caught my attention recently. I said, we need to have Bill back in to discuss this. And it seems to dovetail nicely with the positions that Dan Barker had last week, which I tend to disagree with. And perhaps in light of your sharing about your blog and diving into this, we can maybe get a little closer to what is real and what is perhaps an illusion.
Sure, that'd be fine. Great. So let's start off with this idea that everything's determined. Okay, suppose that's true. Then it's determined that we all think we have free will and we act as if we have free will. So either it's determined that we think we have free will or we actually do have free will. In either case, we need to make choices. We have a life to live. So in that sense, it's like a silly question, and why you
well, in the one case, as I mentioned, it would be the illusion of free choice, right? But I loved a soundbite that came up last week. I don't know who was quoting who, but somebody had this brilliant soundbite, which was, I believe, I believe in free will. I have no choice. I have no choice but to believe in free will. Okay, which is what you were just saying, right?
Well, no, we have a choice. And if you truly believe and act as if you have no free will, then you're not living up to your full human potential.
Right. But in the light of your blog, I thought, well, maybe it makes sense because Dan seems very much at peace with himself and he's very happy. And he says, I'm a happy being and my life is good. And I don't believe in God and I don't believe in free will. Well, but then might that be because he has the absence of anguish, because he has programmed himself to believe that nothing matters. He's not in control. He doesn't have any choices.
Well, that's the thing. If you truly believe that you have no choices and you have no control, you're just going to be wandering aimlessly through life. So I have not met this guy, Dan. I haven't talked to him, so I don't really know what his
I don't think that's his foundational starting points are that we don't determine our biology. We don't determine our genetics. We don't determine for large part our environment, our social structures, our culture. All of these are determinants that you could say we overestimate the abilities, our innate abilities to affect and bring change in the world, right? I mean,
but that's not where he was going, Dan. I mean, he was very clear that he literally believed we do not have free will and we do not actually make any choices, that it's all an illusion, it's all predetermined. That was his
Okay, so
position, and he clearly outlined it.
all right, so I wasn't here last week, so let's
Yeah.
not have a big argument about what he said or didn't say. But what you were to what you were talking about, Dan, all the stuff, our environment, our history, our genetics, our body, all these are in the rubric of what Jean-Paul Sartre, famous French existentialist, calls facticity. There are a whole lot of things about our life that are factical. That is to say, they're just there. We can't do anything about it. Like, here's my computer mouse. All right, it's just a thing. It has no free will. It has no volition. It can only be what it is. Sartre contrasts facticity with freedom. Now, Sartre asserts that we are free. Now, Sartre goes like way to an extreme of this. Is that he says in the early part of Being and Nothingness, nothing determines. We're always free to make a choice, regardless of our past, regardless of our motives, regardless of anything in the past. We're always free to do something else. He claims that. I think he goes a little bit too far, but let's suppose that we do have the ability to do stuff that is not predictable, that's not determined by the past. It can be something new. And we live in a world of facticity, and we ourselves have a whole lot of factical stuff about us. My whole history from when I was born up to now has already happened, and it's part of me, but it's part of my facticity. I can't change that. I can't go back and say, oh no, I'm going to go to a different college. No, I'm not going to go out with this woman. I'm going to go out with that woman. No, I'm not going to. It's like, no, you already did it. Sartre makes he has a famous play called No Exit, where there's three characters and they in various ways they're all dead in this they're in the afterlife of some sort, and they're all trying to justify their lies. They're saying, well, I did that, but I'm not really that kind of person, except that by this time, once you're dead, you can't change yourself. They are that kind of person. So Sartre has this notion of, all right, so let's just start with a premise that we're free, that we're not fully determined by the past. Sartre says we're not determined in any way by the past. Well, that's a little too far, but let's say that there's aspects of our life that is not determined by the past. Then what are you going to do with your own facticity? For instance, you might have some kind of addiction. And he actually, in his book, he talks about somebody who is addicted to gambling. And the gambler says, well, I've gambled in the past, but I'm not really a gambler, and I can quit gambling anytime I want to. And then something comes up, and there he is gambling again. Sartre says that each time it happens, he has chosen to gamble. And it could be any addiction. Drink, it could be an alcoholic. It could be a drug addict. It could be addicted to sugar, coffee. You could be addicted to anger, or there's all kinds of things we're addicted to, both physiologically and sort of psychologically. If you're addicted, you're stuck in your addiction, and to say, no, I can always change, but in fact you never change. All right, there's something a little odd about that. What's going on? Sartre calls that a form of bad faith. He says these are all. He says that you all, at some level, you're free, and you're claiming that you know you're free, and that there's certain aspects of you that are factical. One aspect of bad faith is to push away, just sort of deny the factical parts and say, no, I'm free. I can always quit smoking, quit drinking, quit gambling, whatever it is. Bad faith, because you're lying to yourself. It's a very peculiar notion of lying to yourself, because in order to lie, if I lie to you guys, I would know what the truth is, and I'd say something different to you. Like, I'm wearing a red shirt. How do you like my red shirt? Well, that's obviously a lie. Okay, because I was wearing a blue shirt. But if I tell myself, well, I wouldn't say I'm wearing a red shirt, but I would say I'm not really a drunkard, even though I take several drinks a day and get besotted by the end of the day. But I'm not really a drunkard. Well, that's a form of bad faith. You're lying to yourself. There's another way of going about it. So that's the form of bad faith. We're saying you're denying your factual part. There's another way of being in bad faith, and use this a similar example. Oh, I'm a drunk. I can't do anything about it. It's just hopeless. I'm just be a drunk. Well, that's denying the freedom part of who you are. So there's freedom and facticity, and the interplay of those is fascinating, and that's the crux, really, of the whole existentialist program. How do you deal with the antinomy of freedom and facticity? There's a lot of literature about it. This business of and stop me at any point if you think I'm rambling on too much. Okay.
No, but I want to.
Well, I'm actually. Oh, go ahead, Dan.
I want to interject something kind of comical here because I have to run several different things in my head as I'm hearing what you're saying. I was thinking, oh, you know what? I want to pass the baton over to Wade and ask his perspective from a theological standpoint. I was also thinking this reminds me something like the golden mean, where you kind of fall off of that sharp edge of the arete or the virtuous man into areas of bad faith, right? And it's a sense of knowing that you do that. You're honest with yourself, or you're trying to sabotage something. It's kind of like Edgar Allan Poe swerving towards a pothole on his bicycle. But the one comical thing I was thinking about is that you nicely got into these little vignettes of I'm a drunkard and I'm this and that, right? Well, be aware, we make vignettes of the show, right, that we send out, on.
Oh, great! You're gonna clip out the part where Bill Meacham says,
like
"I'm a
Bill
drunkard."
Meacham, he's like, I'm a drunk. I'm a drunk. Come see Bill Meacham. He's had way too much to drink.
Bill Meacham, I'm a very wise philosopher. Listen to me. Okay, you got that part?
Yeah.
Okay. So
wait, you need one of us to say that, Dan.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, well, let's have Wade. Let Wade tell me about is Jesus the right entry point here, or just God in general? How do people of faith?
No, I'm gonna go somewhere different with it.
Okay.
I don't like talking theology, actually. And I'm not a theologian. I'm much more practical than that. So there's a statement in the Baha'i faith that truthfulness is the foundation of all virtues. Jesus said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." Pilate famously replied, "What is truth?" Right? So I love your analogy there, and that sort of Occam's razor of being honest with yourself, that about your facticity, if I got that word right, but also about your freedom, your free will. So I come from an alcoholic family. When I was in college, we all had to take those tests at 1 or 2 points to find out whether you're an alcoholic. And it's like, if you say yes to 8 of these, you're an alcoholic, right? And I said yes to like 15 of the 18, right? But I've never had a problem with alcohol. I did in my youth have a problem with drugs and alcohol in a small period of time where I was repeating bad choices and bad behavior. But for me, when I made the decision to not do that anymore, it was difficult, and I had some relapses. But then I decided to move. I moved out of Alaska. I got out of my circumstances, got away from everybody I know. It's kind of like, I remember talking to somebody who had a problem with alcohol, or maybe it was cigarettes, and it's like, you know, every bar on every corner, you know where every cigarette machine is. I don't even know where the cigarette machines are. But if you have that problem, or to put it differently, opportunity only knocks once, but temptation leans on the doorbell, right? So
I like that. Okay.
I moved out of my circumstances and I radically changed everything because I was determined to get away from that. My mother, died at age 35. My sister was an alcoholic and a felon. And I love this sort of razor's edge of, you must accept, and there's a quote here from Cameron Cohen, which I'm just going to show. Rule number one of being an addict, you're always an addict. I don't disagree with that, right? I don't disagree with that. But many addicts are able to manage their addiction by staying away one day at a time, right? So that's kind of that situation, right? Of recognizing the truth, being honest with the truth. And my pet peeve, this is where I'm going with all this. My pet peeve is people who do not really use root cause analysis to really get to the bottom of an issue, which is one reason why I love philosophers, right? Because they spend time getting to the bottom of it. What is the underlying reality? What is the true nature of things? And that's why my response to all this is truthfulness is the foundation of all virtues. And in the context of addiction, I love that you framed it in terms of lying to yourself, either that you can quit anytime you want, but also that, well, I'll always be a drunk. I have no control over it. Those are both lies.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let me just say something about that. Great illustration of how to exert your free will. So you're a drunkard, you're an alcoholic. You try to just amp up your willpower, walk past that bar. I am not going to go in. I'm not going to, oh, Joe, hey, Joe. Oh, yeah, okay, what's going on? And bam, there you are, right? You're stuck in what I call first order thinking. You're just going through your life and you just do what you do. And if what you do is an addiction to, in this case, let's say alcohol, then you just do it. And even though you kind of sort of don't want to, you do it anyway. It's first order thinking. In order to get out of that, you have to exert your second order thinking, which apparently is what you did, Wade. You realized, you took a look, okay, here's my life, and it's not working. And what can I do to change it? You probably didn't do this while you were drinking in the bar with your friends. You probably like, okay.
No, it was in the hungover moments. It was in the shame moments. Right.
When you're not
after I got out of jail, right?
Okay. And when you're not in the situation, you can take a step back. I'm going to quote something from Sartre. This is from a piece called Materialism and Freedom. Freedom. Okay, here's what. The possibility of rising above a situation in order to get a perspective on it. That's the exertion of second order thinking. He says a perspective which is not pure knowledge, but an indissoluble linking of understanding and action. It's not just, oh, I know this and that, I can decide what to do. That's what we call freedom. This is, I'm quoting from Sartre here. No materialism of every kind can ever explain it. A series of cause and effects cannot make me look back at my situation in order to grasp it in its totality. Okay, so, but that's what freedom is. And this is a later writing of Sartre. In my essay, The Anguish of Freedom, I take Sartre to task because he says there's nothing in your past, nothing in the history, nothing in your motives that can prevent you from being free. But in the later work, he recognizes the critical aspect of this is to be able to step back, take a look at yourself. That's what I call second order thinking. You're thinking about stuff, and then you're thinking about how you're thinking about stuff. You're conscious of the world, you're in it, you're doing your thing, and then you notice what you're doing, get an idea of what you're doing, and then you can start thinking about how can I change this if I don't like it. And one of the ways to do it, which is apparently you've done successfully, is to change the situation you're stuck in. So change your facticity. The facticity is you're in some town in Alaska with lots of bars and cigarette machines, and you know where they all are. Well, you change your environment, go someplace else. All of a sudden, it's factical. You're in some other city where you don't know your way around, and you can't. There you
Well,
are.
and it was
Part of
also
facticity.
it was also applying a principle that's featured in many of those addiction programs, that of recognizing a higher power, and also of seeking outside help, right? So I did all of those things in that. I went to a religious college, university, and I embraced it and all that. So it was, I don't want to make it sound like it was easy. It was not. It was radical.
No,
and
right,
but
right.
I recognized the severity of the situation. To your point, I took action. I'm not claiming credit. I'm not saying it was easy, but I like what you're explaining here. We're gonna go to break again, and when we come back, we're gonna dive deeper into this from a biblical example perspective. But I'd like to conclude this section by inviting you to comment on the conclusion of your blog. You walk through many of these issues in your blog, which, by the way, I'm going to go ahead and put this in the chat so that others can go read your blog. It's right there, the link.
There it is.
So please check out Bill Meacham's blog, The Anguish of Freedom. But you conclude by saying a different and more cogent assessment of our freedom comes from a Sufi teacher. Freedom of will is, strictly speaking, continuous opportunity to do good, no matter how many the shortcomings or how often the repetition of serious mistakes. And allow me to read the final quote, and then I'll let you comment. I love the way you concluded this. Far from occasion for anguish, our ability to make free choices can engender hope. We don't have to be stuck in harmful behaviors. Our freedom can give us the great satisfaction and even exhilaration of knowing that we are each, as the poet says, master of our fate and captain of our soul. So where does that optimism come from to conclude a blog about the anguish of freedom in this manner? And what thoughts can you add to that as we shift to the next section?
Well, the whole blog was about Sartre's assertion that once you really know you're free, you're going to be in anguish because you can never tell what you're going to do the next minute, which I thought was ridiculous. And I was trying to say, here's a better way of looking at it. The optimism is that you're not in fact constrained to do what you did in the past. Sartre has another quotable little quip. We are condemned to be free. That's part of human facticity. It just is what it is that we're free. So really recognizing that is a way to, it can be hopeful, like in your case. You got out of the constraining psychological and probably physiological dependencies that cause you to do behaviors that weren't entirely optimal. And it's great. It's good news. Wow. We don't have
thankfully, I don't
stuck.
think I had gotten to the point of physiological dependencies. It was psychological, emotional weaknesses and habits.
Yeah. Okay. Some people are, in fact,
right,
physiologically addicted to alcohol or some other substance. Well, they obviously
and I personally never smoked, so I was never addicted to nicotine, which would have been more of that kind of a thing.
Nicotine is more addictive than a whole lot of things, more addictive than heroin. Yeah, but it's a legal drug. What's that about? All right, that's a whole another topic here. But I guess the point is that there's 2 points. If you recognize your freedom, then that allows you to be free and not be constrained, and that's a hopeful thing. And in order to recognize your freedom, it helps a whole lot to have a voice from outside you. That could be a friend, an intervention by your family or friends or somebody that you care about, or it can be a message from God, whatever that word means to you, a message from the divine, something bigger than you are that has your welfare at heart. And
at a minimum, we could all agree that love is bigger than us, and expressions of love are powerful.
I can agree with that. Yeah.
So I'm going to just then segue by saying in my autobiographical trilogy, which discusses some of those circumstances, including the high-speed chase with the Alaskan state troopers that landed me in jail, I later wrote that autobiographical trilogy, and people have asked, was it cathartic? And I said, no, it wasn't cathartic, but I did learn things about myself in the process. And one of the quotes at the very beginning of the first volume is that an unexamined life is not worth living. I believe that was Socrates. An unexamined life is not worth living. And so this second order, I guess, thinking or analysis helps us do that, right? To get outside of it, above it, and look at our circumstances differently. The reason I mention my book is to plug my book, but more importantly, the sponsor of the show, Something or Other Publishing, would like to encourage you, the listeners, to think about getting involved in the book publishing process on your own in one way or another. I'm going to share an ad from them, and then we'll be right back with more with Bill Meacham and the Anguish of Freedom. Stay tuned.
And welcome to Something or Other Publishing, or as our friends like to call us, Soup. Soup is a platform that connects authors, readers, and service providers in one convenient place. Choose Soup if you're an author with a great book idea and you're looking for a publisher offering hands-on coaching in some of the best royalties in the business. Or if you're a reader who enjoys engaging with celebrated and emerging authors. We already have over 3,000 of them, and more are joining every day. You can even win free books by voting on their book ideas. Or maybe you're a service provider and you're looking to engage with over 3,000 authors. We're here to help. So whether you're an author, a reader, or a service provider, you're in the right place at Soup. Contact us at help@soupllc.com to learn more.
Welcome back. We're here with Bill Meacham, philosopher and the author of a recent blog, The Anguish of Freedom. We've been talking about free will versus determinism, and we're going to segue now to an example. We've also been talking about addiction and being trapped in your facticity. We're going to go to one of the most powerful examples of all time, one that has lasted millennia, one that inspired those who were enslaved in the United States in chattel slavery, with various spiritual songs about the Promised Land and the River Jordan in those dark years when we had that condition in the United States, and they were looking for a time when that freedom would arrive. I'm speaking, of course, about the children of Israel, the Israelites, who were enslaved in the land of Egypt, and the story of how they were freed to go into the desert to worship their God, which the Egyptians did not want to release them from their captivity, and how famously Pharaoh's heart grew harder and harder as Moses came and the plagues were unleashed on Egypt. He made them make bricks without straw and increased their burdens until finally, after the death of the firstborn, in this dramatic story, which then typifies later the Savior of the New Testament and the sacrificial lamb at the Passover, all of this incredibly rich and deep symbolism is tied up in that story of being freed from an enslaved condition in a foreign land. But what I want to specifically talk about in that story is the part that people often don't remember, which is that the Israelites, once freed to go out into the desert to worship their God, immediately began complaining about their new circumstances and constantly grumbling. And it's a very difficult story to read because it's time and again they complained and griped against Moses, and God rescued them, and they fell into complaining again, and they were longing to go back to Egypt, and they were remembering the leeks and the onions that they had when they were in Egypt, and they wanted to go back to their enslaved condition. So when I read this blog about the anguish of freedom, that's what I thought about. And then when it came time to inherit the promised land, they had all kinds of fears. They didn't want to go into the promised land. There's this story of the 12 scouts that were sent in one of whom was named Joshua and one of whom was named Caleb. I named my son Caleb after one of those scouts, who brought a good report back and said, this is a great land, and with God's help, we can easily take this land. It is a land flowing with milk and honey, which is, again, the concept of these spiritual songs that inspired the enslaved people. But 10 of those scouts came back and said, no, it's filled with giants, and the land devours the people that inhabit it. And, if we go in there, we'll surely all be killed. So I find this a fascinating story in this context, especially as it has inspired people, for thousands of years. Bill, we mentioned that we're going to be talking a little bit about that. I don't know if you have any thoughts to add to this sort of scenario that I've just described here.
Well, yeah, it's a wonderful metaphor. There's some disputes about how historically accurate it is, and we don't need to get into that.
We're not going to get into today.
Right. So, but
let's just say it's a story, an inspiring story,
for today. And the Israelites were slaves in Egypt, and God sends all kinds of. They say, "Come on, let's get out of here. We want to go over there to Canaan." Pharaoh says, "Hell no, you're my slave." Okay, well, our God's going to do all these bad things to you, and there's plagues, and I forget what all, locusts and stuff. He finally says, like, all right,
lice and frogs, and the river turning to blood, and hailstones, and on it. There are 10 of them.
All right, so metaphorically, just in our life, let's go back to this addiction thing. Metaphorically, you're addicted to, say, alcohol, whatever. Who's the Pharaoh that makes you stay there? Well, it's your facticity, the fact that you have a habit of doing it. Maybe you're physiologically dependent. Certainly, you're psychologically dependent. All these things they're the Pharaoh saying, you have to stay here. You have to stay here. You're not free. You can't get out of here. You got to stay. And what happens is it finally gets so bad, and this is the analogy of the frogs and the rivers of blood and what all, that even you in your state of being addicted can't stand it anymore. That's analogous to the Pharaoh saying, get these Israelites out of here. I can't stand this.
Rock bottom.
Rock bottom. You're hitting rock bottom. And here's the critical part. You've hit rock bottom, and you seek for some way out. Most, if not all the time, you're helped by somebody. It's like you're stuck there by yourself, but if somebody from the outside offers you a helping hand, then the door opens a little bit. There's Leonard Cohen says, there's a crack in everything, and that's when the light gets in. The light gets in. Okay, here's
Anthem.
Here's a possible way out of here. And you, in the state, when you're not in the throes of your addiction, you're in between addictive episodes, so to speak. Then you say, okay, if I alter my circumstances, move to a different town, say, then I have a chance of breaking this thing. And that's what, analogously, the Israelites and Moses says, we're going to go across the River Jordan into that other land. So we're going to change our physical circumstances. We're going to change our facticity. And then with a new change, then there's more of a chance to go the way that your second order self wants to. Now, it's the second order thing. It's also called metacognition. It's called self-awareness. There's probably some other names for it. We all know what it is. And it can be, there can be helpful ways of doing it, and otherwise not so helpful. Common situation of you're socially self-conscious and you're embarrassed, but you're conscious of yourself in the sense of thinking of what other people are going to think of you. All right, but that's a way of metacognition, second order thinking. It's not very useful. If you go up another level, like, oh, look, I'm being embarrassed by all these people. I'm afraid of what these people think of me. why do I care what they think of me? And then you can go on from there. So there's levels of it. And I say second order, it could be third or fourth or fifth, or in practice, second is pretty much.
Yeah, let's pause. Let's pause there for a moment. I don't want to break your train of thought because I love how you're expounding this, but I want to pause right there.
Too late. You broke it.
Oh no, we'll try to pick it back up. But Cameron Cowan has another comment here. I like this. It's important not to shame people for doing drugs. It's important not to fall into the calls of virtue. And we in our family talk about this a lot. Do not shame and blame. Don't shame and blame each other. It's not helpful in any way, shape, or form. At the same time, you were kind of just talking about the awareness of what will other people think, and then you were talking about transcending that concern, right? Because that's not, it's in one sense not a healthy concern. And feelings of guilt and shame are not helpful.
They don't motivate you very well.
Generally speaking.
Yeah.
And at the same time, one of my favorite light bulb jokes is how many psychologists or whatever kind of social worker you might describe does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer is only one, but the light bulb really has to want to change, right? So the point that I'm getting to is, how do we arrive at that rock bottom feeling if there's no shame, if there's no guilt? Well, one way is just like, I don't like my circumstances, right? I don't like my circumstances. Social shame is perhaps not the biggest motivator. But at the same time, you know, there are circumstances that are objectively not good. And there are people who are not as concerned about circumstances that are objectively not good. This is a completely different, I guess, moral question. I'll open it up to you and or Dan. This is one that occupies me in terms of the title of this show, the role of religion in society, right? And we've talked a lot on this show about religion must inspire and not coerce. But there's a fine line there.
Well, it's like, you don't want to shame and blame people, because all that does is make you feel superior and them feel inferior, and that's not a recipe for anybody really changing the situation. But you do want to intervene in some way. So the tricky part is, how do you offer an alternative to somebody who's stuck in some kind of unhelpful situation without shaming and blaming? And I don't have it. It's like, you got to figure it out in each situation. But if you come from, as you were saying earlier, from an attitude of love and acceptance, rather than a superiority, I'm morally superior to you and you should do what I say, because
that's a cancer. This moral superiority is absolutely cancerous, and it's so deceptive. It is so hard to root out the attitude of moral superiority, but it doesn't help anybody, especially not the one who has it.
It doesn't help the person who thinks they're morally superior. Doesn't help the person who thinks they're morally inferior. I mean, there's a certain reward inherent if you're in a group and you're all advocating and living the same morality, and you look down upon people that are not in your group because they are morally inferior. At least you have a feeling of solidarity with your group, which is better than being completely isolated. But it's not as good as being in a community of loving acceptance as opposed to moral superiority. So it's not an easy answer, but at least there's no recipe. How do you intervene with somebody who's doing stuff that you see isn't really very good for them, and they seem to be stuck in it? And how do you intervene? Well, you just do your best, and here's another place where second order thinking, metacognition, self-awareness comes in. Notice what you're doing and notice the effects. If you're just blame and nobody's changing, you need to take a second order stance about what you're doing. Oh, that strategy's not working. Well, darn, what else can I do? And you look for self-help books, you go to your faith community, you find help, so whatever. So this ability to look at yourself is what I call the fundamental human virtue, the human excellence. It's unclear whether any other animals have that. We just recently got a dog, and the dog's just going to go sniff at what they want to sniff at, and eat what they want to eat, and it's not clear at all if they have any concept of themselves. But humans do, clearly. So,
well, that's an interesting one. And in terms of this determination or deterministic versus free will, animals have instinct, right? They are, in that sense, programmed isn't the right word, but it's certainly closer to being programmed than what human beings are. Human beings
right.
don't have that instinct and are dependent and reliant on kind of figuring things out. And there are all kinds of ways in which we figure things out or don't figure things out. But that's an interesting distinction between us and the animal kingdom.
Well,
my
let me just wait. We're part of the animal kingdom. It's not between us and the animal kingdom.
Fair enough.
It's like us and the rest of the animal kingdom, or the other animals. I mean, for all we know, whales might be very, very self-aware and very intelligent. They live in a whole different environment. They don't speak in words that we can understand, but they've got their own whale songs and stuff. But all right. Anyway, all right. Now what?
Well, Dan, did you have a comment? I thought you were going to jump in there for a moment.
I just think that mammals have. I guess one of the things to look at is dogs. I've been fortunate to have canines and animals in my house, and I growing up and into adulthood, and I really do think that they have an ability to have an awareness of self. I don't think it's the same as humans, but it's hard to distinguish why it's different or how it's different.
Well, I was going to say thank you, Bill, for pointing out my moral superiority vis-a-vis animals by claiming that I'm not one.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Is a good call. Anyway, we're gonna once again go to a commercial break. Another one of our sponsors is Planck SIP. So for those who like a more highbrow philosophical approach, have a listen to this. When we come back, we'll continue with Bill Meacham. Stay tuned.
Recognizes the transformative potential of combining art and technology, creating a platform that celebrates synergy. Joining Planck SIP means becoming part of a vibrant community that thrives on intellectual discourse, creative collaboration, and idea exploration. Whether you're a writer or an artist, or simply passionate about culture, Planck SIP offers membership plans tailored to your needs. So unlock your creative potential with personalized content co-creation and guidance from Planck SIP founder, Daniel Sanderson. That's me. Choose from 3 pathways. Participate in the Writers Cooperative Competition, host a video podcast series, or utilize our publishing services. Gain official contributor status, publication opportunities, advanced literary analysis tools, and free content creation services. Join Planck SIP today and explore the fusion of art and technology. Share ideas and nurture your creative pursuits. Embark on a journey of artistic discovery, intellectual growth, and creative collaboration in an ever-evolving landscape of art and technology.
I almost feel embarrassed watching that.
Are you feeling shame, Dan? It's not coming from us.
Well, it's self-induced. It's like, yeah.
All right.
I don't know. Help me out, guys. What is that? What is that I'm feeling? Like, what is that? Give me some constructive criticism about that.
Embarrassment, social, like self-consciousness. I mean, we're taught, oh, don't toot your own horn. You know, it's like,
yeah.
So, but how do you let people know about the services and things you offer without tooting your own horn? So I wouldn't worry about it. I thought it was a very nice thing.
We all loved it, Dan.
Okay, so
what I'd like to do next is you've talked about the second order thinking. I want to go to an even higher order place and talk about that divine inspiration. Again, the story, the transcendent story of the Israelites and going to the promised land, and the aspirations of the afterlife. There was an interesting comment earlier on. I'm going to go find it now and see if I can share it. It was this one here. How can you be sure that we do not determine our genetics or parents or environment? What if later it is proved that we do choose all of them before birth? This is actually a concept that I thought a lot about. When so my religious beliefs are that we have a soul. We have the possibility of living beyond this life. This life, in my view, is like a womb. Jesus talked about being born again, and Nicodemus said, did we enter again into our mother's womb? And Jesus said, unless you're born of the water and the spirit, but to me, the analogy is when we pass on into the next world, it is a birth experience. We are developing the qualities, the spiritual qualities, the virtues that will serve us in the next life. Just like in the womb, we develop the eyes and the limbs and the lungs that had no purpose. Our lungs and our eyes, except minimally perhaps, and the limbs had no purpose in the womb, none whatsoever. Only after birth do those organs that were developed in the womb have purpose and meaning. Now, it's not that the virtues and the qualities that we can develop in this life are useless in this life, but it is my firm belief that those enhanced qualities that we develop with our freedom of choice, our freedom to do, as you said in your blog, to continue to do good no matter what, and that we are the master of our fate and the captain of our soul. In fact, we're developing spiritual qualities now that we really don't know how these will help us to function and excel, hopefully, in the next world, whatever that looks like. And so along the way, the thought that I had was, well, is there like some pool of spirit and the divine, dollops a spoonful into each person? Or does that spirit, that essence, whatever it is that is us and continues on, you could call it a soul, does that have some kind of awareness? And do we even have some ability to participate through a choice about the facticity that we will experience in this life? Ensan raised this question. I think it's a great one. We don't know. I've often thought and felt that despite all the challenges that I had in life, and my early childhood was pretty bad. Some have had it worse than me, but I was literally kidnapped. I was literally living in a tent in Alaska for 10 months. I was literally separated from both parents for over 2 years. Never saw my mother once in 2.5 years during that time when I was 9, 10, and 11. So many things like that happened to me that were, really bad compared to some others in the Western world. And of course, you have other people in horrific circumstances all over the planet. But I've somehow felt that I had some choice in the matter, that I wasn't just a victim placed here in these circumstances, but that I chose a life that had certain hardships, certain opportunities, and certain challenges, and that I participated in that choice somehow before being born. I've had that feeling. And so that's why I raised that question. My point being, Bill, as you conclude on that optimistic note, what thoughts do you have for us that you'd like to share from your perspective that might give us insight into how Bill Meacham looks at the divine, looks at the eternal, if you believe in that, looks at the ultimate purpose and path that we are on as human beings?
Right. Thank you for that question. First thing I want to say is all these virtues that you're accumulating in this life that you hope is going to be good for the next life, they're good in this life.
They
You want to
absolutely
be
are.
loving, kind, generous, cooperative. Whether if you're an atheist and believe that when you're dead and that's the end of it, it's still useful to cultivate those
Amen.
qualities here and now. Okay, so
Didn't
but
want to diminish that at all. I agree that if we need to create heaven on earth. That's really my whole point. But that they will also be useful going forward
yes,
is my point.
well, one of the Sufi teachings is that if people say, "Well, what's heaven like? What's hell like?" Well, look at your life now. The afterlife is going to be a continuation of that.
Yeah.
You're not going to take this physical body with you. You're not going to take your possessions. There's this thing about he who dies with the most toys wins. No, he who dies with the most toys is completely hung up on having toys. In the afterlife, they'll still be hung up on having toys. He who dies having um, helped people and expressed love and concern and is a force for good, those qualities will continue in the afterlife. Well, what kind of afterlife would you rather have? Afterlife of happiness and fulfillment
Well, getting
and
back to
joy and
Pharaoh,
light and stuff.
right? The one that died with the most toys was, were the pharaohs in Egypt who killed all their servants, and buried them with them because they believed
Oh,
they
right,
could
right.
take it all with you, right? They built these massive monuments to themselves called pyramids because
Yeah,
they somehow believed that they could take it with them, and they didn't want to let go of what they had in this life, and they even,
right.
yeah, it's
And and
unbelievable.
and the Buddha says the root cause of suffering is clinging to permanence in the midst of permanent change. And here we
Yes,
are.
Ensign, another comment from Ensign was talking about exactly that.
Right, right.
The-
So, but this thing about, oh, well, maybe before I was born, I chose this life. Well, maybe you did, or maybe it was completely an accident of genetics and culture and whatever. In either case, that's part of your facticity. Here you are, you're in the world as you are, regardless of where it came from. What are you going to do with it now? Now, if you believe that you were someplace before you were in this body, and this is an ongoing journey, that gives you some impetus to do something to get yourself in a good place after this. If you're done with this body, you sort of like take off this cloak and put on a different one or something like that. So in that sense, it could be considered useful. But really, even if you made the choice back then, that's part of your facticity. It got you here, and so what are you going to do from here on? That's the more practical application of this whole thing.
I'm reminded, you referenced Leonard Cohen earlier. I'm reminded of Paul Simon in off of his Graceland album, one of my favorite quotes. I'm trying to remember the name of the song. Hey, breakdowns come and breakdowns go. What are you going to do about it? That's what I'd like to know.
Okay.
It's it is about that freedom of choice. The anguish of freedom is really when you've got a knife at your back and you're on the gangplank and you're looking out and there are sharks in the water. What are you going to do?
Yeah, except that's a metaphor. If you're actually physically in such a situation, there's no anguish of freedom at all, because whatever you do, you're in bad shape. You don't have, if you're coerced from the
That's
outside,
true. You don't really have a choice in that matter.
right?
Yeah.
But if you're psychologically feeling the pull to do something that's not helpful, or the push that something's going to hurt you or whatever, that's similar, but it's not the same, because it's within your life that you do have the freedom to do something different, to take matters in your own hands. Now, you need a lot of help for that. Well, most of us do. And that's where prophets such as Moses and Muhammad and Buddha and lots of saints and prophets are there to help us. And that's where, however you want to conceptualize, think of a higher power, that's where the higher power is there to help you. And there's a prayer I think of fairly often. It's, Great Spirit, thank you for reminding me to remember you. And then there's a second part, and thanks for being there when I remember.
I love it. I don't think we could end on a better note. Bill, thank you so much for being here tonight. It's a pleasure having you back. We will do it again. Keep writing those blogs, and friends, check out his blog. And I have to now ask, was there a book that you published? You have written a couple of books.
I've written, the book is called How to Be an Excellent Human.
Okay, so we'd like to give a copy of that book away. We'll procure it from you and give it to the person whose comments you liked the most.
I'll have to read
We've
through the
shared
comments,
some.
don't I?
You can, pick out the one that you like. We'll highlight it, and we'll invite that person.
I tell you what, just to be contrary, how about make sure you hit the like, subscribe, and notification buttons for some other thing that's not even part. I don't know where that comes from. Give the book to that guy. No, that's just a joke. I don't know.
Well, I was asking Dan about that, and apparently it's a glitch, right?
Yeah. I do like Ensan Rahim's thing about the Buddha. That was a good one. What is Ensan Rahim says, answering what is the word that when the promised one says, all the learned one would flee away, and he said, I tell you now the word is this, he. I don't know what that must be. Is that something from the Baha'i
Not
scriptures?
sure where that's from. He appeared in the raiment of I.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's good. He appeared in the raiment of I. So, I mean, all right, that's a whole nother discussion about what is the nature of this divine being. It's actually found within yourself. But I think we probably don't have time to go there. But I like that one. Let's see what else we got here. Addiction might be the hidden depression of childhood complexes. Okay. What if it's later proved that we do chose them all before birth? Baha'u'llah said he appeared in the raiment of I. Okay, so that's another one. This guy Ensan Rahim seems to have a lot of good stuff here, so I'd give the book to him because he's lots of them. We made the God, and therefore will grow with us. As the highest attributes of human perfection. Baha'u'llah is saying all his attributes, much so from human now. Okay, so
well, there we go. Ensan, you are the proud winner of How to Be an Excellent Human Being. Could you repeat?
How to Be an Excellent Human. If you go, I could make my own little plug here, bmeacham.com. Go to bmeacham.com. Somebody put it in the chat. And you'll find a link to my book and a lot of my writings, including the blog essay that we're talking about today, bmeacham.com. And so thanks for having me.
We did share that again. We did share that earlier, but I'm going to share it again. And hostplanksip.org. What? No, we don't want planksip.org. Let's go.
Well, you go there too. That's a really good place. That's Dan's place.
There we go. So check out Bill Meacham's site, and you can check out his book. And Ensan, write us, send an email to info@soupllc.com with your mailing out address and remind us that you won Bill Meacham's book, and we will get that sent off to you. Thank you, Bill, for being here. Thank you, everyone, for joining in to Created in the Image of God, the role of religion in society. We look forward to having you back with us next week for a surprise guest, which we're not going to reveal tonight. Thank you all, and we'll see you next week.
All right. Thank you.